I feel like I'm going to embarrass myself if I keep on gushing about this book. Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And today I'm going to be wrapping up what I read in April. So I read 7 books in April, but 2 of those were for the BookTube prize, so I'll not be talking about those until this round, the semi-finals, quarterfinals, ends, and I'll wrap up my thoughts on those books at the end of May. So I've got 5 books to talk about today. And I had an amazing reading month. So many good books, and then I topped it off with Dewey's 24-hour readathon. I wish every month could be this good. I'm not sure May's going to, because I've found myself completely invested in the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, and that's eating into a lot of my reading time. So I'm going to kick off with my favourite book of the month, possibly my favourite book of the year, Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart. So I went to an event hosted by Toppings Books in Edinburgh for the launch of this, although that very nearly didn't happen because although my friends had booked tickets for the Edinburgh event, literally the day before I realised I'd booked tickets for the event that they were hosting in St Andrews. But thankfully the people at Toppings were really good at changing my ticket over. Thankfully the Edinburgh one hadn't sold out, and it was really nice to hear Douglas Stuart talking about his books, talking about his writing process. Like, I didn't know that Shuggie Bain had been rejected something like 40 times. It took him 10 years to write, and the initial draft was like thousands of pages long. He's really funny, he's really passionate. He also dealt with some quite annoying questions. I really can't stand people that go to events like this, and when it comes to the question time, they ask these long convoluted questions and they're just talking for ages, and you're like, shut up, I'm here to listen to the author speak, not you. Ask your question, get on with it. But yeah, I just thought he was really funny, really engaging, and it was really interesting to hear him talk.
It's so incredibly innocent, but it's that desire to connect. I came of age before the internet, I came of age before email. And, I didn't have the mobility to be able to go up into the town and look around art galleries or go to the gay bookstore or go to the nightclub. And so I had to find it where it was. I couldn't find it at school or in the neighbourhood. And so I reached out in all these ways that I could. And that's the truth for a lot of people that sort of lived on the margins.
I don't usually go to author events. I probably wouldn't have gone to this one if my friend hadn't suggested it first. But actually, it was kind of a bargain, because not only did you get the event for your ticket price, which I think was only about 20 quid, but you also got a hardcover copy of the book as well, which itself is like £17. So I'll definitely be looking out for more events like that, and for authors that I really like. And yeah, this copy is gorgeous. Oh, it's still got my ticket inside. But the end papers are like the city and the ducat, as we call it, which has a relevance to the book. And it's signed, which is always nice. So yeah, I now have this gorgeous hardback copy of the book, but I actually read it as a NetGalley, and I read it in 2 days before the event because I wanted to have read it when, like, by the time I got there, it was only me and one other person in the audience who had. Because yeah, so I read Shuggie Bain at the kind of end of last year after holding off on it for fear that it wouldn't live up to its hype. And when I read it, I loved it, and I wished I'd read it sooner. So when I had the opportunity to read the NetGalley copy, I practically bit the publisher's hand off, because I didn't want to be slow to things this time around. So this is about Mungo, who is a boy growing up in the East End of Glasgow in the early 90s. He's the youngest of 3 children, and he's effectively being raised by his only slightly older sister, because his mum, she's often absent and she struggles with alcohol dependency. This story is told over 2 timelines, one before and one after, like a central event. And so the story is split between a fishing trip that Mungo is sent on with 2 of his mum's acquaintances from Alcoholics Anonymous. And then the other timeline is the development of a relationship between Mungo and another boy called James, who lives on his estate. And although they live closely together, they live on different sides of the Catholic and Protestant divide. But they find friendship and connection in James's ducat, where he keeps pigeons. But Mungo's gang leader older brother is really deeply entrenched in the sectarian violence between the Protestant and Catholic community, and as James and Mungo grow closer and their feelings for each other develop, that in itself puts them at even greater risk. I felt there was a lot of parallels that can be drawn between young Mungo and Shuggie Bain. And at first I was a little bit worried that maybe Douglas Stuart only had one story to tell, but it really quickly became apparent that that's definitely not the case. I think it's more that Douglas Stuart has got themes that he wants to explore and possibly things that he wants to revisit in different ways in his writing, and I'm totally here for that. I just think it's really it's not a topic that you can cover in one story, and I think he's right to want to delve deeper, look at it from different angles, and he does so in such a fantastic way that I can't complain. And the story is just as compelling as Shuggie Bain. Dare I say it? Probably more so. Yeah, in fact, I'm gonna pin my colours to the mast. I do think this is a stronger book than Shuggie Bain. I thought the dual timeline worked so well in this book, and as the story unfolds, my heart was in my throat so many times. Douglas Stuart writes with a beautiful tenderness, but it's a tenderness that's also really realistic, particularly in this book. And there's also equally realistic violence in it too. For me, knowing Glasgow, it felt very authentic to the time and place. Every character in this book is really vivid, really richly crafted. They've got all those shades of grey that make up a person. So the cast feels like, yes, there are bad people in this book, but in most of the cases, you can understand where they've come from or how things in their lives have turned them into the person they are. But not in a way that justifies their behaviour, but just as this really rich picture of what people are. I felt like the subplots were just as strong as the main story too. I'm thinking in particular of a car ride that Mungo takes with his brother. That really stood out to me in this book. And because there is quite a lot going on, it's a book that really feels like it's teeming with life. So I feel like I'm going to embarrass myself if I keep on gushing about this book, but I really loved it. I think Douglas Stuart is an exceptional writer, and I can't wait to see what else he brings into the world. From the event, I loved the way he spoke about his characters. He really cares about his characters and their stories, and as a reader, I feel that love for his characters too. Next up was my pick for April for my tbrtackle, which is a year-long readathon that Kieran over at KD Books is running. And as ever, had to jump through some hoops to find out what I would be reading this month. So here are the 9 books that are still on my tbrtackle. Hamish is very interested in them, as you can see. And now we are to pick a favourite book. So you see this bookshelf a lot when I am filming videos. This is one of the shelves that has the books that I have read. These are kind of the ones that I like the most. Not necessarily favourites and not necessarily all the ones I like the most, but ones that I can fit on this shelf and that, I don't know, I live in the vain hope that someone will ask to borrow one of them. It's never happened yet. What am I going to pick? The 13th Tale is a possibility. Little Friend is a possibility. Cleaned Out Annie Ernaux is a possibility. Got a Small Things is a possibility. Swansong. Oh, this is already too difficult. I don't know what I'm going to do. Let's go with the 13th tale. And now I am to find out what the page number on the last page is. Now, what is all of this? I don't remember this. Are these... Is it the last page of the story? Or is it... There's a postscript. I guess that's still part of the story. Oh, those are reading notes. I don't think we should include those. Do they have page numbers though? No, they don't. Okay, so, phew. We are 4, 5, 6. Why did I pick a long book? Now, I am to pick which of these has the closest number of pages. Hamish has fucked off. Well, exciting. This has 4, 5, 2 pages. And so I'm finally, years behind everyone else, I'm finally getting to Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. Yeah, excuse me, I'm wearing my dressing gown. Energy prices have gone up and I'm cold, right? Deal with it. So I just watched the rest of the prompt video. And there are booby traps. If you are basic, as in according to Brandon's bookshelf, who set the prompt, if you are basic, which means if your favourite book is between the average length of a book these days, which is between like 320 something or 400 pages, you have to switch out your entire tbrtackle stack. Or if one of your favourite books is one of the 5 most predictable favourite books, you're basic and you have to switch out your entire tbrtackle stack, because I'm well over 400 pages, so I am safe. But for anyone who's had to swap out the rest of their stack for being basic, my condolences. Sucks to be you. So yeah, my pick was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo, and kind of like what I was saying with Shuggy Bane, I can't believe it's taken me so long to get around to this book, any book by Bernadine Evaristo. I think part of that was, as well as my like aversion to hype, a lot's been made about how this book, that like the way this book is written, the term experimental was thrown about, and it's not a term, it's not a term that usually excites me about a book. So this is, it's kind of like a novel in short stories. It's split into sections, and each section contains some different stories about 12 women and one binary character who are linked in some way. And then all those sections are linked to a play that some of the characters are attending the opening night for. The writing itself is quite fluid in that like punctuation and line breaks. I'll try and show you some of the pages. Oh, I don't think this is going to work. The punctuation and the line breaks are not used in the usual way. There'll be line breaks in the middle of a sentence. Capital letters aren't really used at the start of the sentence, things like that. And although I say that I'm not usually interested in experimental writing, like it wouldn't be the thing that draws me to a book, I actually think it really works in this book. And, you know, having said that about experimental writing, I actually really do like an interesting structure. And for me, the way the stories and the characters are linked actually made the reading experience even better for me. I also think the writing style, it's not a case of style over substance, because I actually think it helped the prose to move forward more like natural speech, which suited this because it's almost like an oral history. It's got like an oral history vibe, and I think the writing style suited that. Some of the characters in this book were really fantastic. I loved reading the different experiences of all the characters. And I think it makes a really strong statement against the idea that any one group, one population is a monolith. Many of the women in this particularly go against racial stereotypes, and it's got such a vibrant and positive feeling in this book. And at times that can mean that obviously, you know, it's not representing all experiences. There's quite like a middle class vibe, although it does mention poverty and gentrification and things. But, you know, no one book can encompass all experiences. And I feel like this book is meant to be positive, it's meant to be a celebration. And I really love this. Having also read the book that I had to share the Booker Prize with, I'm now even more miffed that that award was split between the two of them. I'm a Margaret Atwood fan and I did enjoy The Testaments, but to compare The Testaments and this is just ridiculous. Evaristo is by far the more deserving winner in my mind, and it's a bit of a shame that she had to share it with Margaret Atwood. Next up was my audiobook, The Museum of Abandoned Secrets by Oksana Zabuzhko, which I came across this kind of by accident, kind of by chance, because I had been looking for a Ukrainian book for Eurovisionathon, and at the same time I was also trying to find a decent thing to listen to as an audiobook in the very slim pickings that are available in Kindle Unlimited. So I was really excited when I found this book. I found one book that kind of like satisfied both of those things, and I kind of went into it not knowing very much about it. But this is the story of a Ukrainian journalist, Darina. She's the daughter of a dissident who was labelled insane during the Soviet era by the regime. But this book is set in the early noughties, where Ukraine was still finding its feet as an independent country. Darina produces a TV show about kind of like local heroes, normal people that have done good things, and she's working on an episode about a female resistance fighter from the 1940s, and she happens to fall in love with the woman's great grandnephew, I think, Adrian. But as bureaucracy and corruption conspire against finding the truth about this woman, Adrian starts having dreams of the events that that woman and her fellow resistance comrades experience. There's quite a lot of dream sequences in this, but not in the kind of like soft focus fuzzy way. They are logical and they make sense, like it's as if he's experiencing the actual events at the time. And at the same time, Darina is also dealing with the death of her best friend, who was this like internationally renowned artist and the girlfriend of a politician. And her investigation on the resistance fighter weaves itself into like the story of her friend's death as well. I was a bit intimidated when I realised how long this is. It's 30 hours on audio, and I think it's like 700 pages long. To begin with, I did struggle to follow it, and I did consider DNFing it quite early on. But something made me persist, probably because it was for Eurovisionathon. And I've seen people compare this book to those kind of like the magnum opus works of Russian writers, which I'm not a huge fan of. I can definitely see the relevance of that comparison as well. And probably listening to it as an audiobook wasn't the best approach. There's a lot of places mentioned, a lot of people mentioned, and people who have different names. You know, I got a bit lost quite frequently. But, you know, I'm really glad I persisted with this book, because overall the story's fascinating. I really enjoyed the character of Darina. I thought she was really compelling, and a lot is made of these like secrets that young Ukrainian girls used to create by burying treasures in the ground but framing them in a certain way and then burying them, and I loved how that concept of secrets is woven in through a lot of the story. And the writing was really really good in this book. It's laser sharp at points and really insightful on like political issues, but it's also really beautiful. It's got some really beautiful turns of phrase, and you know when you're reading this book as being like painstakingly researched for historical accuracy. And so because of that, I've come to understand so much more of Ukraine's history, and then obviously its more recent history as well. I just thought this was fabulous. Then we have Swansong by Kerry Andrew. So it's the library books, it's probably going to be a bit shiny. I picked this book up mainly because of its setting. It's set in the West Highlands. It's an area I know really well. I basically live there. And you guys know me. I love to see Scotland on the page. And I was also intrigued by the story. So we meet Polly, who is failing uni. She's fucked up her friendships and she's running away from a traumatic event. And she joins her mum to stay in a small Scottish village in order to escape London. One of the first things she sees on arriving is a man pulling a dead bird apart with his bare hands. And she also starts to experience strange happenings, strange visions on the loch side that leave her quite unnerved. She strikes up a friendship with the local barman, which promises to break the monotony of her stay, but you know, she should probably have learned from the previous experience that she's running away from that messing with drugs doesn't always make for a fun time. So she's upset, she's increasingly freaked out by these kind of apparitions by the loch, and so she finds herself drawn to that man who was ripping apart the bird. He's this strange loner type who seems to be hiding something. And this book mixes a kind of creepy atmosphere. It's inspired by a folk ballad with sort of mystery. It's all seen through the eyes of Polly, this snarky student. At first, I wasn't really sure it was working for me. Polly is not a likeable character, and I really quickly got bored with her kind of like, everything's shit, this place is so lame and backwards attitude. She's incredibly selfish as well. I'm not a huge fan of writers who set their stories in places they don't really seem to have a great understanding of. Polly's attitude to Scotland and the author's attempts to make this village and the people in it come across as quite backwards nearly made me put this book aside. But I was curious about that kind of otherworldliness and finding out the story of this gruff outsider dude. So I decided to give it a bit longer, and I am glad that I stuck with it. I mean, Polly remains pretty insufferable throughout the book, but thankfully her attitude is kind of tempered as events take over, and the community does become a bit more realistic once we get to know some of the different characters. There's a sense of magical realism in this story which I felt struck just like the right note. It's not overdone, and in particular I really enjoyed, there's a character in this book called Jim. I won't give any spoilers, but I really loved him. This story, you know, it goes into guilt and loss and the impact of split second decisions, and I also really love some of the depictions of nature and the scenery. And on the whole, I felt like the writing did have moments of like really clever wordplay that were descriptive and pretty evocative, but without being flowery, which is pretty much my ideal. So this book, it did win me over, and I thought actually it was pretty good. And then finally, I had another library book, some more shininess, Claire Harman's Charlotte Bronte, A Life. And I'll kind of preface this by saying that I am a Bronte appreciator, but I'm not like a connoisseur by any means. I've read a book by each sister, or two in Anne's case, and I've enjoyed them all fairly equally, but you know, they're not my favourite books of all time. I'm not obsessed with the Brontes. But that said, I am quite interested in their lives and what they achieved in their short time on this earth. I've never read a Bronte biography before. I kind of just picked this up on a whim when I was in my local library. So I'm not sure what, if anything, this adds, because there are a lot of other biographies out there. So I can't kind of review it in that context. But what I can review on is the strength of my enjoyment and what I got out of reading it. So I knew a few things about the life of Charlotte and her sisters before going into this book. I'd seen like a documentary and things, but this is really well fleshed out. It starts with it starts before the birth of the sisters, with background of particularly their father, the marriage of the parents, and you get a real sense of what their home life must have been with these characters at the helm, and learning about the early life of the sisters and the multiple tragedies that hit that family was really sad reading, but it's also fascinating to see how much of those life experiences influenced the remaining sisters' works. Obviously, more so in Charlotte's case, because that's what this book is about, but I really appreciated the parallels that were drawn between life experiences and her works. So, I mean, it's clear that the author's gone into this from a place of love for Charlotte and for the Brontes, but this isn't a biography that tries to kind of, you know, deify Bronte and make her sound perfect, particularly in relation to her relationships to other people, and especially like her Belgian teacher. It's clear that Charlotte didn't always have the maturity or rationality in the way that she related to other people. She was also quite vulnerable too, and I think it's always interesting to see the fullest picture of a person, even someone who, you know, they've reached iconic status like Charlotte, and to see, you know, their flaws and how they are as a human, or how they were as a human being. I felt this was really accessible. I felt it flowed really well. There's a satisfying mix of discussion on both, you know, like the personal aspects of her life, but also looking at her works in a bit more depth. And I think the mix kept it from feeling too dry. And I actually really liked that there are quite a few like images included, because obviously there's a lack of photography in the time in which Charlotte Bronte was living, but it still managed to bring a few things to life with images. And I knew all the sisters had died young, but not really the details. Particularly in Charlotte's case, the timing is so cruel. It is really sad. I don't know how different their experiences were from other people that time, though. You know, obviously medicine wasn't what it became to be and things, but it is really sad to think what else we could have got from the Bronte sisters if they had lived longer. But I suppose, you know, although the published works aren't, you know, by any measure an extensive catalogue, the Brontes left so much more of themselves behind. So, you know, books like this can be fleshed out and we can understand them better, thanks to people like Claire Harman, because they were prolific writers in all of their spare time, and it's really interesting to see how much of their lives was about writing. And yeah, I just thought this was really interesting. And I've got some other Charlotte Bronte books that I haven't read yet, so I think I'll go into them with a bit more understanding of the author than I did when I read Jane Eyre or read her sister's works as well. So yeah, definitely a worthwhile book to read. But as you can tell, my voice is not very strong at the moment. I'm getting over COVID, but this is my first day where I've kind of like got up and done housework and things like that, to try and feel a bit back to normal. I'm going to attempt to walk my dog later, but I'm getting really breathless. Even little things like cleaning the bathroom this morning nearly killed me. So I will take it easy still, but yeah, I seem to be over the worst of it. So that is what I read in April. As usual, let me know, have you read any of these books? What were your thoughts, or are you inspired to pick any of them up? I would love to know, so drop me a comment below. And I'm probably away back to watch more court footage. So until next time, bye. A hard copy cover of